The airport was loud, crowded, and full of people rushing from one place to another, but he stood still for a moment, holding his daughter's small hand in his. She looked up at him with bright eyes, her face full of excitement. For her, this was an adventure. For him, it was just another step in a life that never seemed to slow down. He adjusted the strap of his worn-out bag on his shoulder and checked their boarding passes again, even though he had already done it 3 times. It wasn't that he didn't trust himself. It was just that when you're responsible for someone else, especially your child, you learn to double-check everything. "Are we going to fly above the clouds?" his daughter asked, her voice full of wonder. He smiled, tired but warm. "Yes, higher than the clouds." She squeezed his hand. "Can we see the sun from there?" "Maybe," he said. "If we're lucky." They walked toward the boarding gate, blending into crowd. He noticed families, business travelers, people in expensive clothes, and others like him. Simple, quiet, just trying to get somewhere. He didn't feel out of place, but he didn't feel like he belonged either. That feeling had been with him for years. Life hadn't been easy. Raising a child alone meant every decision mattered. Every rupee counted. Every day was a balance between doing enough and worrying it still wasn't enough. But he never let his daughter feel that weight around her. He tried to be calm, steady, someone she could always rely on. When their group was called, they stepped onto the plane. His daughter's excitement grew as she looked around at everything. The seats, the windows, the people. "Look, it's so big inside," she whispered. He nodded. "Stay close." They found their seats in the middle section, not by the window, but he promised her she could lean over a little to look outside once they were in the air. She accepted that happily. As passengers continued boarding, he noticed a woman walking down the aisle. She was dressed simply, but there was something about her presence. Calm, confident, different. She didn't look around like the others. She didn't seem rushed or distracted. She took a seat in business class, just a few rows ahead. He didn't think much of it. People like her lived in a different world. His world was simple: work, home, his daughter, and try to build a future one day at a time. His daughter tapped his arm. "Can I have the window later?" "Yes," he said. "I promised, didn't I?" She smiled and leaned against him. The plane doors closed. Safety instructions began. The engine started to hum, slowly growing louder. He felt that familiar nervousness in his chest, but he kept it hidden. His daughter didn't need to see that. As the plane began to move, she grabbed his hand again. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm right here." The plane picked up speed, and within moments, they were in the air. For a while, everything felt normal. His daughter watched the sky, her face glowing with joy. He watched her more than anything else. That was his habit, always making sure she was okay, always reading her expressions, always ready. The cabin settled into a quiet rhythm. Some people slept, others watched movies. A few talked in low voices. He leaned back slightly, closing his eyes for just a moment. But then, something changed. It started small. A slight shake, then another. The plane moved in a way that didn't feel normal. Not like light turbulence. This was different. His eyes opened immediately. He looked around. A few passengers shifted in their seats. Some looked up. The cabin crew walked a little faster now, their smiles still there, but not as relaxed. His daughter looked at him. "What was that?" "Just a little shaking," he said gently. "It's normal." But inside, he wasn't so sure. The shaking grew stronger. A sudden jolt made a few people gasp. Now the cabin felt different. The calm was gone. People started looking at each other. The quiet conversation stopped. Then came a sound. A strange, sharp noise from outside. Not loud enough to cause panic, but enough to feel wrong. He sat up straight. The seatbelt sign turned on. A flight attendant's voice came over the speaker, steady but slightly tight. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." His daughter held his arm tighter now. He placed his hand over hers. "It's okay." But his eyes were focused now, alert, watching everything. The plane shook again, harder this time. A few overhead compartments rattled. Someone behind them whispered, "Something's wrong." That one sentence spread faster than anything else. Fear doesn't need proof. It just needs a spark. His daughter leaned closer. "I'm scared." He turned to her fully. "Hey, look at me." She did. "We're okay," he said, his voice calm, steady, even if his heart wasn't. "I'm here." She nodded slowly. Then suddenly, a loud alarm sound echoed through the plane. This time, no one stayed calm. Gasps, shouts, movement everywhere. The plane dipped slightly, then corrected, but the feeling of control was gone. Oxygen masks dropped from above. That was the moment everything changed. People started panicking. Some shouted for help. Others struggled with the masks. A few froze completely. He acted fast. He pulled down the masks and placed one over his daughter's face, adjusting it carefully. "Breathe," he said. "Just breathe slowly." Then he put his own on. The cabin lights flickered. Another announcement came, but this time it was harder to understand. Technical issue remained seated, but no one was really listening anymore. Through the window across the aisle, he saw something that made his chest tighten. A faint glow, then smoke. His breath caught for a second. Fire. Not inside, but outside, near one of the wings. His mind raced, but his face stayed controlled. His daughter followed his gaze. "What is that?" she asked. He looked back at her immediately. "Don't worry about that. Just stay with me." The plane shook violently again. A few people screamed. Luggage fell from somewhere behind. The air felt heavier now. The calm father, the quiet man, something inside him shifted. Not panic. Focus. Pure, sharp focus. He looked around, quickly assessing. Exits. Distance. People. Movement. His hand tightened around his daughter's. "We're going to be okay," he said again, but this time it wasn't just comfort. It was a decision. The plane began descending. Fast. Too fast. The ground was coming closer. Everyone could feel it. The fear in the cabin was no longer hidden. It was loud, real, everywhere. His daughter's hand trembled in his. He pulled her close, wrapping one arm around her, shielding her as best as he could. Outside, the flames flickered stronger. Inside, time felt strange, fast and slow at the same moment. He closed his eyes for a second, not in fear, but in thought. One thing was clear. Whatever happened next, he had only one priority. Her. The plane dropped again, harder this time. A loud impact sound echoed from below. People screamed. The cabin shook violently. And in that moment, as everything felt like it was falling apart, he held his daughter tighter and whispered, almost to himself, "We're getting through this." The ground was rushing up, and nothing would ever be the same after what was about to happen. The plane hit the ground with a violent jolt that threw people forward in their seats. The sound of metal crunching and glass shattering filled the cabin, mixing with the screams of terrified passengers. Smoke started rising quickly from one side of the plane. Flames licked at the edges of the fuselage, bright orange in contrast to the dim, shaking cabin. The father felt his stomach twist, but he did not let panic take over. He had to think fast. He looked at his daughter, who was clutching his arm with wide eyes, her small face pale with fear. "It's okay," he said, trying to sound calm, though his heart pounded in his chest. "We need to move quickly, but stay close to me." The daughter nodded, her grip tightening. He could see the fear in her eyes, but there was also trust. That trust gave him a surge of courage. He took a deep breath and pushed forward, scanning the cabin for the safest exit. Around him, chaos reigned. People were panicking, pushing each other, trying to get out first. Some were crying, others shouting for help. Flight attendants tried to guide passengers, but even they were overwhelmed by the sudden disaster. He moved his daughter in front of him, holding her close to shield her. "Follow me," he said firmly. "We'll get out." As they weaved through the aisle, he noticed a woman in the elegant dress. The one who had seemed so calm earlier was still in her seat. She was slumped unconscious and partially trapped by a fallen overhead bin. Panic rose in his chest. Everyone else was focused on themselves, but he knew he couldn't just leave her. She was a stranger, but someone's life hung in the balance. He paused for a fraction of a second, weighing the risk. His daughter tugged gently at his hand. "Dad, can we help her?" she whispered, her voice trembling. That small voice was enough. He nodded. "Yes, we can. But you stay safe, okay? Watch me." He maneuvered around the debris, carefully keeping his daughter out of harm's way. The heat from the fire was growing, smoke thickening in the cabin. He could feel the sting on his skin already, but he pushed the pain aside. He reached the woman, assessing the situation quickly. She was heavy, and the bin pinned part of her shoulder, but he had no time to waste. With careful but determined effort, he lifted the bin just enough to free her arm, then pulled her gently from the seat. The weight of her unconscious body was difficult to manage, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He balanced her across his chest, feeling every pound as if it were a lifeline he could not drop. Smoke choked the cabin now, making it hard to breathe. The heat was unbearable, searing his jacket. He focused only on one thing, getting her out alive. As he turned to move back toward his daughter, a piece of the cabin ceiling collapsed behind him, sending sparks flying. He ducked instinctively, then pressed on. His daughter's small hand gripped his own tightly as they moved toward the emergency exit. Flight attendants were directing passengers, but many were too scared to listen. The father took control, guiding those near him with calm commands. "Stay low. Keep moving. Don't stop." He could see the open emergency exit ahead, smoke curling from the opening. He knew if he could just reach it, they would have a chance. But then he realized something even more terrifying. The flames were spreading faster than he thought, and some passengers were trapped behind fallen luggage. He scanned quickly, and his eyes landed on a man struggling to free a woman in the middle of the cabin. Without thinking twice, he shouted, "Over here! I can help you." The man nodded, relief in his eyes, and together they lifted the luggage enough for her to crawl free. The father's daughter watched wide-eyed as her father took charge. She felt fear, but also pride. He turned back to her. "Almost there. Keep going." As they neared the emergency exit, the roar of the fire outside grew louder. The heat was intense, and the smoke made every breath feel like fire in his lungs. He placed the unconscious woman near the door, carefully lowering her onto the floor where another flight attendant could reach her. Then, without hesitation, he grabbed his daughter's hand and pushed them both outside. The open air hit them like a wave. Heat, smoke, and the smell of burning fuel filled the senses. Passengers were streaming out, some screaming, some crying, some hugging each other in relief. Emergency slides were deployed, and he guided his daughter down carefully, holding onto her small hand. She slid down safely, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and amazement. Once they were on the ground, he looked back. The plane's fuselage was starting to collapse, flames consuming the side where the fire had begun. His heart pounded, but his gaze immediately returned to the woman still lying near the door. Flight attendants were working to get her down the slide now, but she was heavier than anyone could manage alone. Without thinking, he ran back toward the plane. His daughter's hand slipped from his for a moment, and she called after him in fear. "Dad!" He turned briefly, shouting, "I'm coming right back. Stay here with the crew." She nodded, tearful but trusting him. She knew he wouldn't leave her side, and she trusted that he wouldn't leave anyone else's either. Inside, the smoke was thicker, the heat more intense. Flames licked the walls near the exit. He moved carefully but quickly, guided by instinct. He reached the woman and assessed her once more. Her breathing was shallow, and her unconscious state made it urgent. With a deep breath, he lifted her again. This time, every step felt heavier. Sparks flew near his jacket, and a small part of the fuselage began to give way. He pressed on, forcing himself to focus on the exit, one step at a time, one moment at a time. Nothing else existed except his daughter, the woman, and the fire around him. Finally, he reached the emergency slide. Flight attendants helped guide the woman down. He held her carefully, ensuring she didn't fall. The slide seemed endless, but he concentrated on balance and speed. At last, she reached the ground safely. The father was breathing hard, sweat and soot covering his face. He turned to his daughter, who was watching anxiously. "I'm here," he said, crouching down to her level. "We're safe." Her arms wrapped around him, holding on tight. Tears ran down her cheeks, not from fear anymore, but from relief. He hugged her back, feeling the adrenaline slowly fade, replaced by exhaustion. Around them, emergency personnel were arriving, guiding passengers away from the plane. checking for injuries. The sound of sirens shouting and crackling fire filled the air. Yet in that moment, all that mattered was that his daughter and the woman were alive. He glanced at the woman, now being attended to by paramedics. Her face was partially hidden, but he could see her eyes fluttering open. She looked around, confused, then focused on him. For a moment, it seemed as if time froze. She tried to sit up, but one of the paramedics gently guided her back down. Her eyes locked with his. In them, he saw gratitude, surprise, and something he couldn't name. She mouthed something, "Thank you," but the sound was drowned by the chaos. He nodded, understanding. No words were needed. He turned back to his daughter, brushing soot from her hair. "Let's stay close," he said softly. "We're not done yet, but we're okay for now." The two of them stood together on the tarmac, watching as the emergency teams worked tirelessly. He felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. He had risked everything, faced fire and chaos, and somehow managed to save lives. But the weight of it all was settling on his shoulders. He glanced down at his daughter, her small hand holding his. "We did good," he whispered. She nodded, her small smile bright despite the dirt and tears on her face. Around them, the world was noisy and chaotic, but in that moment, he felt something simple and pure. They were alive. They had survived together. And somewhere nearby, a stranger owed her life to a man who did not consider himself a hero, only a father trying to protect what mattered most. Even as a fire burned behind them and sirens wailed, he knew that this day, this moment, would change everything. Not just for him, but for everyone involved. And deep down, he felt a quiet understanding that the next steps, whatever they were, would be unlike anything he had ever imagined. For now, all that mattered was that they were safe, together, and breathing. The world outside the plane could wait. They had each other, and that was enough to face anything. The fire trucks and ambulances surrounded the plane as it lay on the tarmac, black smoke curling into the sky. Emergency responders moved quickly, guiding passengers away from danger, checking for injuries, and helping anyone who needed assistance. The father kept his daughter close, her small hand firmly in his. She was tired, shaken, and covered in soot, but she had survived. That alone made him feel a strange, heavy relief. He could breathe again for now. They were led to a safe area on the grass, away from the wreckage. Other passengers were gathered nearby, some crying, some hugging loved ones, and some staring blankly in disbelief. He scanned the crowd, looking for anyone he recognized, anyone who might need help. His daughter tugged on his sleeve. "Dad, will she be okay?" He followed her gaze toward the woman they had rescued. Paramedics were tending to her, carefully checking her vitals and giving her oxygen. She looked small and fragile under the bright lights of the emergency lamps, but alive. That was all that mattered. "Yes," he said softly. "She's going to be okay." The reality of what had just happened began to settle in. Minutes ago, they had been trapped in a burning plane. Now they were standing on solid ground, but there was no time to celebrate. Many passengers were still in shock, and the father knew that even those who were physically unharmed would carry the memory of this disaster with them forever. As emergency workers continued their work, a few reporters arrived, cameras flashing. Some tried to get close, asking questions in rapid-fire voices, but the father held his daughter a little tighter and shook his head. "Not now," he said. "We need to go." He wanted nothing more than to get out of the chaos, away from the cameras and the noise. He had never sought attention, and he didn't plan to start now. He knew that the world would soon call him a hero, but he didn't feel like one. He had just done what anyone would do for a child, and maybe for someone else's life if they could. Paramedics approached him. "Sir, are you injured?" one asked. I think I'm okay," he said, though his arms ached from lifting the woman, and his back and shoulders were sore from the weight. He glanced at his daughter, who was shivering slightly. "We need a blanket for her," he said. They handed his daughter a warm covering, and she curled into him. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "I know," he said, stroking her hair gently. "I know, but we're safe now. That's what matters." Nearby, the woman they had rescued was being placed into an ambulance. She stirred, blinking in confusion, looking around at the chaos. Her eyes found him, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to slow. Gratitude and recognition flashed across her face, but before she could say anything, a paramedic guided her away. He didn't watch her leave for long. His focus returned to his daughter. She needed him more than ever now. They found a quiet corner where they could sit, away from the reporters and the crowd. She leaned against him, exhausted, sweat streaked across her cheeks. He brushed the dirt from her hair, holding her close. "Dad," she whispered, Did we really save her?" He nodded slowly. "We helped her, and that's enough." Hours passed. Emergency responders continued their work, checking the wreckage and making sure the area was safe. The father remained with his daughter, refusing to be separated from her. He felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him, but he couldn't let it show. She needed him strong, even when he wasn't. Finally, they were allowed to leave the immediate area. He helped his daughter into a taxi, making sure she was comfortable and wrapped in blankets. As the vehicle pulled away from the airport, he looked back at the burning plane. The fire had begun to die down, but the memory of it would stay with him forever. Back at home, the world had already started talking about the event. News alerts, messages on his phone, and social media posts painted him as a mystery hero who had risked his life to save a billionaire CEO. But he did not respond. He didn't seek interviews or make statements. He didn't want recognition. He had done what he felt was right, and that was enough for him. Life returned quickly to its usual rhythm. Bills needed paying, meals needed cooking, and his daughter still needed him for schoolwork, bedtime stories, and hugs. The memory of the plane crash lingered in their minds, but he tried to shield his daughter from the worst of it. He wanted her to feel safe, to feel that even in a terrifying moment, people could act with courage and kindness. Yet, the woman he had saved had not forgotten him. In the hospital, she recovered quickly, thanks to the care of her medical team. But her thoughts kept returning to the man who had risked everything for her life. She was used to power, influence, and control, but here was someone who had nothing to gain and everything to risk. His courage and selflessness struck her deeply. She asked her assistants to try and identify him. Footage from the flight, statements from witnesses, and flight records were all carefully reviewed. It took time, but eventually, they discovered who he was, a single father living quietly with his daughter, working hard to make ends meet. She learned about his life, his struggles, and the small act of love and dedication he performed daily. She realized that the bravery he had shown in the air reflected the character he had lived by his entire life. Meanwhile, the father continued his routine. He didn't read the news much, preferring to avoid the attention. But he began to notice small changes. People at work talking quietly, neighbors giving him sympathetic smiles, strangers nodding in recognition. He didn't acknowledge it, though he felt a mix of embarrassment and confusion. He had only done what any father would have done. One evening, as he was helping his daughter with homework, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find a smartly dressed woman standing there, holding a small bouquet of flowers. For a moment, he didn't recognize her. Then he realized who it was, the woman he had saved. "Hello," she said softly. "I wanted to meet you personally." He blinked, unsure what to say. I didn't do anything special," he muttered. She smiled gently. "You saved my life. That is more than special. That is everything." He gestured for her to come inside, still wary of attention and recognition. She declined politely, saying that she wanted a private conversation away from cameras and reporters. They spoke quietly on the small porch, the evening breeze carrying a strange calm after the chaos of the day. She asked about his life, his daughter, and the challenges he faced as a single parent. He spoke simply, honestly, without exaggeration or pride. She listened, clearly moved by his words. She realized that he had been living courageously every day, not just on the plane. His bravery wasn't an act for fame. It was a part of who he was. "You didn't have to risk your life for me," she said finally. "But you did, and I want to do something for you in return." He shook his head. "There's nothing you can do. I just did what anyone would do." She didn't argue. She simply smiled. "Maybe, but the world should know about people like you. People who act without thought of reward. People who protect and care, even when it's dangerous or difficult. I want to help you, Not because you saved me, but because of who you are." He was silent, unsure how to respond. Recognition and reward had never been a part of his life. He had never sought it, never expected it. And yet, here was someone offering more than gratitude, offering a chance to change his life and the life of his daughter. In the days that followed, the news began to spread. The story of a mystery hero reached headlines, showing images of the plane, the fire, and the bravery that had saved a life. The world admired him, celebrated him, and praised his courage. But he didn't read the articles. He didn't watch the news. He simply focused on his daughter, on their home, and on the quiet routines that defined their life. Still, he knew that things had shifted. That day had left its mark, not just physically, but emotionally. He had faced fear, chaos, and danger, and had emerged with life preserved, love protected, and a quiet sense of purpose strengthened. He realized that heroism wasn't about recognition, awards, or fame. It was about choice. It was about action when it mattered most. And somewhere, not far away, the woman whose life he had saved was taking steps to ensure that his bravery would not be forgotten. She had the means, the influence, and the will to make a difference in his life, and she had decided to do so, not for publicity, but because the act of saving another human being had shown her a kind of courage she could not ignore. The father didn't know it yet, but the story of that day was far from over. The life he had saved, the actions he had taken, and the small but profound moments of choice and love would ripple outward, reaching places he had never imagined. And when the time came, he would discover that one selfless act could truly change everything, not just for him, but for the world around him. For now, though, he held his daughter close, the quiet evening settling over their home. He felt the exhaustion in his body, the ache in his arms, and the weight of what had just happened. But most of all, he felt gratitude. Gratitude for life, for survival, for the small hand in his, and for the reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage and love could shine the brightest. The days after the crash were quiet for the father and his daughter, though the world outside was anything but quiet. The story of the mystery hero had spread across news channels, newspapers, and social media. Everyone was talking about the man who had risked his life to save a woman from a burning plane, though no one knew his name. Headlines called him brave, selfless, and extraordinary, but he paid no attention to any of it. Fame had never been something he wanted. He cared only about his daughter, her safety, and returning to a sense of normal life. Still, life had already begun to shift around him. A few neighbors and co-workers gave him small nods of respect, some whispered words of admiration, and occasionally, strangers would look at him with recognition. He avoided interviews and declined offers of media appearances. To him, these were distractions from what truly mattered. The quiet, everyday life he and his daughter had fought to maintain. Meanwhile, the woman he had saved, the billionaire CEO, had recovered in the hospital. She was still processing everything that had happened. Her physical injuries were minor, thanks to skilled doctors, but the mental weight of the near-death experience stayed with her. She couldn't stop thinking about the man who had run into fire and smoke without hesitation. She remembered the firmness in his grip, the calm in his voice, the way he had protected his daughter while risking his own life. That courage could not be measured by money, influence, or power. It was a rare and pure form of humanity. Determined to find him, she instructed her assistants to track down every possible lead. They examined airport surveillance footage, passenger lists, and witness statements. They asked every crew member who had been on board, every passenger who had seen him act, to describe the man who had saved her. Gradually, piece by piece, they found him, a single father living a modest life, balancing work and parenting, someone who had never sought recognition or reward for his actions. When they finally confirmed his identity, she felt a sense of awe and admiration. Here was someone who lived courageously every day, not for headlines or accolades, but because it was who he was. She realized that if she truly wanted to honor his bravery, it couldn't be just with words. It had to be meaningful action. Back at home, the father was unaware that the world had begun to focus on him. He went about his routine, cooking meals, helping his daughter with schoolwork, tidying the house, and preparing for the next day. He still had the faint ache in his arms from carrying the woman, and the memory of the fire lingered in his mind. He tried not to think about it too much, but sometimes at night, He would lie awake, feeling the heat of the flames and the roar of the engines, replaying the moments that had demanded every ounce of his courage. One afternoon, there was a knock at his door. He opened it cautiously, expecting a delivery or a neighbor. But standing there was a woman dressed in a simple, elegant outfit, carrying herself with a quiet confidence that seemed familiar. He blinked, momentarily confused, before recognition struck. "It's you," he said softly, unsure what to say. She smiled gently. "Yes, I wanted to meet you in person." He stepped aside to let her in, still feeling a little overwhelmed by the suddenness of her appearance. She declined to enter fully, wanting to respect her privacy, but they sat together on the porch, away from prying eyes and reporters. "I owe you my life," she said quietly. "I can't thank you enough." He shook his head. "You don't have to. I just did what anyone would do for a child, and for someone in danger." "No," she said firmly. "You didn't just act. You risked everything, and you did it without hesitation. That's not something anyone can claim. That's something extraordinary." He felt uncomfortable with the praise. Recognition had never been his goal. "I'm just a father," he said. "I had to protect my daughter. Everything else came later." She nodded, understanding. "That's exactly why it matters. You act without thought for reward. You act because it's the right thing to do. And that is something the world needs to see, even if you don't want it." They talked for hours. She asked about his life, his daughter, and the struggles he faced as a single parent. He spoke honestly, without embellishment. He described the long days, the financial worries, the sacrifices he made for her well-being. She listened, absorbing every word, realizing that his bravery extended far beyond the plane. It was a pattern in his life, a way he approached the world every day. After listening, she finally said, "I want to help you, not just a thank you for saving me, but because of who you are. You've lived with courage and honesty in ways most people can't imagine. I want to make a difference in your life and your daughter's life." He was hesitant. Offers of help often came with strings attached, with expectations he could never meet. But she was different. There was no pressure, no showmanship, no desire for recognition. She simply wanted to give back, to honor what he had done. Over the next few days, she worked quietly behind the scenes. She arranged for his medical bills to be fully covered, ensuring he and his daughter received the care they needed. She made sure that his daughter's education would be secured, that she would have opportunities he could never have dreamed of providing alone. The father continued his routine, still unaware of the full extent of her efforts. He felt the subtle changes in life, small gestures of help, unexpected kindness from strangers who seemed to know who he was. It was strange and slightly uncomfortable, but he appreciated it without needing to understand why. One evening, she returned, this time with an invitation. She wanted him to come to her office, not as a hero in the media's eyes, but as a man whose life she respected and wanted support. He was nervous but agreed, curious about what she had in mind. When he arrived, he was met with warmth, not grandeur. She explained that she wanted to create opportunities for people like him, those who act with integrity, courage, and love, often without recognition. She offered him a role in a new foundation she was establishing, aimed at supporting everyday heroes, parents struggling to provide for their children, and people who made a difference in their communities without expecting anything in return. He was stunned. He had never imagined this kind of opportunity. He had never thought of himself as someone who could change the world beyond his own family. And yet, here it was an offer to do just that. He asked quietly, "Why me?" "Because you show what real courage looks like," she said. "Because your life, your choices, and your bravery inspire me. You've reminded me what it means to act without selfishness, and I want to share that lesson with others." He considered it carefully. This was not about money or fame. It was about purpose, about giving back in a meaningful way. It was about taking the courage he had shown on the plane and extending it to others who needed it. Finally, he nodded. "I'll do it," he said softly, "but only if I can keep my daughter safe and my life simple. That's what matters most." She smiled. "Of course. Nothing else is required." As they left the office, the father felt a shift within himself. The events of the plane crash, the fire, and the chaos had tested him in ways he never imagined. They had also revealed something fundamental. His strength, his courage, and his capacity for selflessness were not limited to a single moment. They were part of who he was. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider a future beyond survival. A future where his actions could help others, where his life would inspire more than just his daughter, where the ripple effect of one courageous decision could reach far beyond him. Back at home, he hugged his daughter tightly, feeling her small arms wrap around him. "We're going to do something good," he whispered, "something bigger than us." She smiled, trusting him completely. "I knew you were a hero," she said simply. He laughed softly, feeling a warmth he hadn't realized he needed. "I just do what I have to do," he said. "But maybe we can help others too." The world outside continued to talk about the plane crash, the heroism, and the mystery man who had saved a life. But inside the quiet home, the father and his daughter felt something more profound: hope, purpose, and the beginning of a new chapter. In the coming days, the woman who had survived because of his bravery would continue to honor him, not through headlines or accolades, but by creating real, lasting change. And he, a simple man who had acted without thought of reward, would discover that the courage he had shown in the most terrifying moments could shape the future in ways he never imagined. He realized then that life was not just about surviving disasters or escaping danger. It was about what you did in the moments that mattered most, and how those moments could change everything. For yourself, for the people you love, and for everyone whose lives you touched, even unknowingly. And in that quiet realization, he felt a sense of peace. The fire had tested him, but it had also shown him who he truly was. And with the woman who owed him her life working alongside him, the father understood that their shared experience was only the beginning of something far greater than either of them could have imagined. The father had always lived a quiet life. He woke early every morning, cooked breakfast for his daughter, sent her off to school, worked long hours, and returned home to help her with homework, tuck her in at night, and do it all over again. Life was simple, sometimes hard, but it was filled with love and small victories. He had never imagined that a single act in the chaos of a burning plane could change everything. And yet it had, after the woman he had saved, the billionaire CEO, arranged to help him. His life began to shift slowly. The first change was practical. She had taken care of the medical bills from the crash, covering all the hospital visits, medications, and treatment he had avoided paying for out of pride. He had felt guilty at first, thinking he couldn't accept charity, but she had explained firmly, "This isn't charity. It's acknowledgement of what you've done. You saved a life. That deserves support, not repayment." His daughter had been amazed by all of it. "Dad, this is incredible," she said one afternoon, as they unpacked the boxes of books, school supplies, and small gifts that arrived at their home. "I didn't know people could do this for someone just like us." He smiled, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "It's not about what people can do for you," he said gently. "It's about doing the right thing and letting life take care of itself. But yes, it's nice to have help sometimes." Soon after, she had invited him to her office again, not for a meeting about money or fame, but for something more meaningful. She had created a foundation in his honor, aimed at helping people who acted with courage, people who put others first without thinking of reward. It was a way to support parents, caregivers, and everyday heroes. She wanted him to be a part of it, not as a figurehead or a celebrity, but as someone whose life and choices inspired real change. At first, he had hesitated. The idea of stepping into a larger world was intimidating. His life had always been private, small, manageable, but he realized that refusing would be turning his back on the opportunity to do good for others. Slowly, he agreed, knowing he could make a difference while still keeping his daughter at the center of his life. The first weeks of involvement were overwhelming. Meetings, discussions, planning events, all things he had never done before. He quickly discovered that leadership wasn't about commands or authority. It was about empathy, understanding, and listening. He applied the same principles he used every day at home: patience, care, and thoughtfulness. Meanwhile, his daughter thrived under the new circumstances. She had access to resources he had only dreamed of providing, and she was growing more confident, curious, and independent. But more importantly, she watched her father navigate these changes with humility and grace. She saw him take on responsibilities he had never imagined, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. One day, while helping plan a community outreach event through the foundation, he met other parents and children. Many had faced hardship, struggling to provide for their families, just like he had. Hearing their stories reminded him of how fragile life could be, how easy it was to overlook the people quietly doing their best every day. He realized that his act on the plane had been a catalyst, not just for himself, but for countless others who would benefit from the programs and support now available to them. The CEO remained a quiet presence, allowing him to take the lead, to make decisions without interference. She respected his judgment, often stepping in only when asked for advice. She had learned from him that real courage was about action, not authority, and she was inspired by how he treated everyone equally, with dignity, respect, and compassion. Over time, the father's life settled into a new rhythm. He still cooked meals for his daughter, still tucked her into bed, and still worked hard. But now, he did so with a wider sense of purpose. He had opportunities to impact lives beyond his own household, to guide and mentor, to support people who needed it most. He understood that heroism wasn't only about dramatic moments like saving someone from a burning plane. It was about consistent, small acts of kindness and courage that rippled outward quietly but powerfully. One evening, as he and his daughter sat on the porch after dinner, she asked, "Dad, do you ever feel like a hero?" He looked at her, surprised by the question. "I don't think about it that way," he said slowly. "I just try to do what's right." "But people talk about you," she said, her eyes shining. "They say you're brave, that you saved a life. And you're helping so many people now. Doesn't that make you a hero?" He smiled softly, brushing her hair back. "Being brave doesn't mean you feel like a hero. It means you do the right thing, even when it's hard. If that helps others, that's wonderful. But I don't need people to call me a hero. I have you, and that's enough for me." His daughter hugged him tightly. "You are my hero," she whispered. That night, as he lay in bed, he reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about the plane crash, the fire, the fear, and the instinct that had driven him to act. He thought about the woman he had saved, the support she had offered, and the lives that were now changing because of that single moment. He realized that heroism wasn't about recognition, awards, or even survival. It was about making choices when it mattered most, choices that could have lasting effects far beyond what anyone could see. In the month that followed, their home became a place of quiet purpose. Letters of thanks arrived from families helped by the foundation. Emails from children who had been given opportunities they would have otherwise missed. The father read each one carefully, feeling a deep connection to the lives he was touching. His daughter often sat beside him, listening to the stories, understanding that even small actions could create big changes. Occasionally, news cameras would appear, trying to capture him in the midst of his work. He avoided them, knowing that the story wasn't about fame or image. The true story was about the courage of ordinary people, the resilience of parents, and the quiet strength of those who acted without expectation. The CEO remained a constant presence, but not an overwhelming one. She encouraged, guided, and supported, but she never overshadowed the father's own journey. She had learned that real leadership came from nurturing and empowering others, not commanding or controlling. She admired him deeply, not for his act on the plane alone, but for the life he had lived and the choices he continued to make every day. One afternoon, as the father walked through a community event organized by the foundation, he saw children playing, parents talking quietly, and volunteers helping in small, meaningful ways. He stopped for a moment, watching. The smiles, the laughter, the quiet moments of joy. It was all connected to that one act of courage, the split-second decision to save a life in the midst of danger. He thought about the fire, the smoke, the heat, and the fear, and realized that it had been a turning point not just for the woman he had saved, but for himself, his daughter, and the countless people now touched by the foundation. A single act had set off a chain of events that would continue to spread, quietly changing lives in ways he could never have predicted. Later that evening, he and his daughter sat together, looking at the sunset. The sky was painted in colors of orange and pink, a calm after the storms they had faced. She leaned against him, her small hand in his, and he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. "Dad," she said softly, "I think you really did change everything." He smiled, pulling her close. "Maybe we both did," he said, "because we face life together, and that makes all the difference." In that moment, he understood something fundamental. Life's true value wasn't measured in wealth, recognition, or fame. It was measured in love, courage, and the choices we made when no one was watching. And he knew that one small act of bravery, done without expectation, had created ripples far beyond his imagination, ripples that would continue to shape the world around him. He held his daughter tightly, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, and realized that everything had led to this point. The fire had tested him. The chaos had challenged him, and yet he had emerged with a renewed sense of purpose. He had discovered that courage, love, and selflessness were the real treasures of life, far more valuable than anything money could buy. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, he felt a quiet hope, a hope that even in the darkest moments, human kindness could shine brightly, a hope that one person's actions, done with love and courage, could truly change the world. He looked down at his daughter, smiling in sleep, and whispered, "We'll keep making the world better, one step at a time." And in that promise, he knew that their journey was only beginning, that life had more challenges, more moments to test their courage, but also more opportunities to make a difference. The fire had changed everything, yes, but what mattered most was that they had survived it together, stronger, wiser, and ready to create a life that honored every choice, every sacrifice, and every act of love that had led them here. He closed his eyes, feeling the quiet strength of the man he had always been, and the man he was becoming. The world outside could wait. For now, he had his daughter, a life rebuilt from the ashes, and a future full of promise. And that, he knew, was everything.